Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I'm your host, Jen, today, and I'm here with the author of a really fantastic new really genre-defying book, I think. There's a little bit of dark academia in there and some fantasy and lots of cool things going on. So could I please ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. My name is Emma Törzs. I am the author of Blood Sister Scribe, which is my debut novel, though not the first novel I have written. Maybe we'll get into that later. Blood Sister Scribe is a standalone adult slash grown-up fantasy novel about two estranged half-sisters who have grown up, sort of been trained from a young age to protect their family's collection of magical books. When the book starts, they have not seen one another for 10 years. One of them has been in their family home in Vermont. The other one has been traveling all over the world trying to escape the people that killed her mother many years ago. And then there's another character who is a young man in a very fancy house outside London, who's sort of beginning to wonder if his life of privilege is more of a cage. And that's where the book starts.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there are so many great characters and so much really cool world building. And it's a beautiful, like, slow burn where you just like ratchet up the tension, like at a really, really perfect pace. But before we get into it too much, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more just about your career and your journey toward this book, because as you said, it was not the first you've written, even though it's the first you've published. So can you talk a little bit about how you got here?
Sure. How did I get here? Well, it all started in 1987. I mean, I've always been, like most writers, a reader. So I'll just sort of blur through the childhood years of lying on the couch reading fantasy novel after fantasy novel, graduating to realism. I was just reading all the time. And I was realizing sort of recently that I am the total opposite of a self-taught writer. I love taking classes. So I started writing, I guess, quote unquote, seriously, like late college, and took a bunch of creative writing classes. I was an English minor, took creative writing English classes. And then I went to get my MFA at the University of Montana. And I showed up at the University of Montana with sort of a stack of very weird stories. At that time, like Kelly Link was and still is my personal literary hero, along with like fabulous, I think they're called, like Karen Russell, Amy Bender, people like that. And so I showed up ready to write my weird stories, also with, a deep love of fantasy, but I've always read very widely in every genre. And I quickly got the weird sort of gently knocked out of me. And in my time in my MFA program, I wrote, the majority were just realistic stories. I like to joke that it's, the classic literary realism story is like straight people fighting over a dinner table. So I had some like sort of, arguments over dinner table stories. So that's kind of a belittling way to describe it. But and then for years afterwards, that's what I wrote. I wrote literary fiction, realistic literary fiction. Had some, success with publishing that, and figured that success would follow when I wrote my first novel, which was a literary realism novel, more or less. It did have some weird stuff in it because I couldn't quite keep myself from adding some weird things. But I wrote that in like I guess from 2014 to 2017, maybe 2013. It took a while. And my lovely agent sent it out on submission and nobody would buy it. And I was super bummed, but not for very long. And then after it was widely rejected, I just sort of had like a come to Merlin moment when I realized that I was very relieved that nobody would have to read this like literary fiction novel. I wasn't very proud of it. I hadn't loved the writing of it. Uh, and I realized that what I really wanted to write was fantasy. So again, I love to take classes. I was like, who can teach me how to write fantasy? Like a week after my novel was rejected, I applied to the Clarion West Writers Workshop in Seattle, which is like a 6-week fantasy and science fiction, sort of speculative fiction boot camp where you write a story every week with 18 other people. And it was the greatest thing maybe that I've done in my life. It was so wonderful. I made such incredible friends that I still keep in touch with pretty much every day, multiple times a day. And I left that really invigorated to just try to write fantasy. This is a really long and winding story, so give me like a symbol if I need to stop talking. But
Keep going. This is
long story short, yeah, I wrote some speculative stories, and then the pandemic came along, and I wrote this novel during the pandemic. In some ways, I do think it's a really pandemic-y novel. Like it's a lot about being trapped and
great.
claustrophobia, among other things. But that's sort of, yeah, how I got here.
Wow, there's so much cool stuff there. So yeah, I would love to talk about Clarion for a second because yeah, like absolutely illustrious people have passed through that program, and I'm sure it's really exciting and really productive. It sounds like I didn't know about like the structure of it, and that's what you do. So that's super interesting to me. Um, I would also love to talk about the moment where you kind of let literary fiction go and embraced fantasy, because that sounds like super exhilarating and freeing and also like really terrifying.
It was both of those things. I'll talk about Clarion first, just because I love to gush about it. Um, Again, the structure is quite rigorous. I have never before or since written a full short story in a week. Usually it takes me like months to write a short story. But we were expected to write one every week. And then for 3 hours every weekday morning, we had workshop and we were reading other people's work. So we didn't sleep very much. We mostly just hung out and bonded really hard and immersed ourselves in the sci-fi community in Seattle, which is really amazing. And Clarion West does a really awesome job of incorporating the broader community into the program itself. So I think that that really cushioned the fear of venturing into a new genre because I got so lucky that I applied kind of on a whim with literary realism because I'd never really written speculative work. I gave them some literary realistic fiction and wrote a long essay explaining what I wanted and why it was realism. And I ended up going like maybe a month or two after, my novel was rejected. So it really cushioned the fear because I just dropped into this lovely like community of like-minded writers who were so encouraging and writing such amazing work. And I had so much fun writing those stories, just kind of like ripping my imagination open. So I think I got to skip the panic part of it because I had community, which has been indispensable in all realms of my writing life. So it was kind of scary, and I still read literary realism all the time, but my brain just doesn't go there anymore for the most part. Um, yeah, I feel like I just kind of shut that door, and now if something doesn't have magic in it, I'm kind of like, why would I, why would I want to write that?
That's so cool to me. And I do like, that even having wide reading habits beyond your like writing interests can be really useful, like because other genres can really inform your,
Mhm.
and it does, I think, in this book. Like there's, I think it really pushes at the boundaries a little bit of like fantasy and like really gets into some interesting, cool areas. Um, I'd love to talk about your the sisters at the heart of this novel, because they're both absolutely fascinating characters, and they have such rich inner lives, which I think is also maybe, kind of what makes it a pandemic novel a little bit too, because I feel like the pandemic produced just like a lot of really interior driven novels,
Mhm.
um, and I just, yeah, their relationship is so complex and nuanced and really like very lovely, in the end, but like it's really a journey to get there. So like could you talk a little bit about how you crafted them as individuals and and their dynamic?
Yeah, I am super close to my own sister. I have one, full blood sister, so to speak, and three stepsisters, two on my mom's side and one on my dad's side. And I really love all of them and feel extremely lucky to have so many wonderful sisters. But I'm very, very close to the sister that I grew up with. So I think about sibling relationships quite a lot because my sibling relationship is one of the most important relationships in my life. I can't imagine spending 10 years without seeing her. Even just writing that was like quite emotional for me because I was like, oh, how could, 10 years, it's a lot of time. So I was thinking about how even people who are raised together have totally different childhoods. And that's something that my sister and I have navigated a lot when we have conflict is that we grew up in the same home with the same parents, but had completely different childhoods and like completely different experiences of our parenting and our childhoods. And a lot of what we've talked about has been kind of trying to reconcile our two experiences to cohesify it to understand one another in a way.
Mhm.
So I was thinking a lot about that with the two sisters and thinking about what it's like to be the one who kind of stays to take care of the parents and what it's like to be the one who leaves. Theirs is a very dramatized version of that. But, I haven't lived, my whole family lives in Massachusetts. I've lived in Minnesota off and on for almost 20 years. So I'm kind of the one who left in some ways, although I'm still quite close. I go back a lot. But I think about it all the time, like why I've made these choices that take me so far from my family, who I really love and wish to be close to. But, um, my other life choices, I don't want to live in, I don't want to live in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Um, and I've made such close community here in Minneapolis that to think about leaving them would be like leaving another kind of family.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the basis of why I wanted to write about sisters and where some of those dynamics come out. Um, yeah, I don't know. Is that a good start?
Yeah, that's a great start. Like it I also I think have a sister who's very important to me, and we also have I think had some very interesting experiences around realizing that we've also had like very different childhoods and saw very different sides of our parents, and
Hmm.
that's such difficult territory to navigate because I think like when you're talking about that, like it's really easy for both sides to feel invalidated, like 'cause saying that your experience was different and having the other sibling not experience that is invalidating for you. But then for the other sibling on the other side, it's like, well, that's hearing that undercuts my experience and makes me, like, and so I just feel like it's all
Hmm.
really intense, like very interesting emotional territory. And it's a really rich, I think, exploration of that dynamic here. Um, what I think is very interesting too is that, like, even though there is this, one has stayed behind and another has fled to like literally the farthest place that you can possibly go to Antarctica. um, but they're both kind of seeking the same thing, like isolation from,
Hmm.
you know, this is. I have a friend who kind of did the same thing. Like he went to Antarctica 15 years ago and like basically stayed there and never came back, and he spends half the year
Whoa.
working there and half the year exploring the world. And on the one hand, it's like super cool and like what a, it seems so glamorous and so interesting, but also like, yeah, that's a choice, to go live at the end of the literal end of the world,
Hmm.
Um, so did you have any experience with that, or did you research what life was like there? Because a lot of it rings true to like what he told me about it.
Oh, good. I do have friends that have worked specifically as electricians in Antarctica. So I interviewed one of them semi-formally. I gave him a whole list of questions and he answered, and then we had sort of a back and forth. And then I have another friend who did the same thing and we chatted about it. I watched a lot of McMurdo video blogs to try to get a sense of it. It's actually funny. I kind of forget about this until I talk about the Antarctic portion, that this novel started because I wanted to apply for the National Science Foundation's Antarctic Artist and Writers Grant,
Ooh.
which is it sends artists and writers to McMurdo Station to spend, I think, 3 months there, which is, I want to do it so badly. But so I was thinking like how I don't have any samples that, would be good in an application. So I'll just sort of start this fake project set in Antarctica to like, kind of weasel my way into the application. But unfortunately, that was 2019. So when the pandemic started, they closed the grant and they haven't reopened it. So I did not even get a chance to apply, but I did get a whole novel out of it. So I can't complain. And now I have a really good sample, hopefully, to send them when they open back up. But I'm dying to go.
Yeah. Oh, that is fascinating. Yeah. Well, because first, like, what a consolation prize, like a publishable novel. Like, that's great. But I do hope that they open up that program again because that does sound super fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still do it, but I remember a few years ago hearing about like Amtrak had one, where they would like pay for
Uh-huh.
a cross-country train trip for you and that sounded really fun too, because I've done some of my best like reading and writing on trains.
Totally.
Hmm.
Yeah, I always say that the best part about being a writer is what you get to do as a writer, like going to Clarion West, for example. Or I've done a bunch of really cool residencies in places that I wouldn't have visited otherwise. Last year, I went to this program called Launchpad at the University of Wyoming, which is a week-long astrophysics boot camp for speculative fiction writers. N.K. Jemisin went also and got the Broken Earth trilogy from that experience. And it was amazing. I mean, my brain was melting the whole time because astrophysics is totally beyond me, and I didn't even understand really how the moon phases worked before then. But that is just so worth all the writerly struggle to be able to do something like that. And yeah, apply to go to Antarctica for no reason other than I'm like, well, I might want to set a story there. You never know.
That's super cool. And I think, a lot of people who like are kind of outside the writing life kind of, I think, view like you're only writing when you are writing, like putting pen to
Hmm.
paper or hitting the keyboard. But you have to consume things in order to write. You have to like not only read, but also have experiences and
Hmm.
learn things and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, and I love this sort of approach to your writing career where you sort of like let the opportunities like inform your writing choices. That's a really cool kind
Hmm.
of dialectic.
I don't know if you can see in the background, we're on Zoom right now for the listeners, but I have like a loom set up in the background because
Oh,
I'm
yes.
taking a weaving class because I want to have a weaving character. But what a great excuse to take a weaving class, telling myself that it's for research. I've always wanted to learn how to weave. You just give the skill to a made up person and
That's great. It's like the like the method acting equivalent of writing.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Oh man. Could we talk a little bit about Nicholas too? Because he's also such a fascinating character. And, as you said, he's kind of in this like gilded cage, where he has what it like appears to be a very luxurious life, but it comes at a great personal cost
Hmm.
to him. And I was wondering, his sections in particular made me think about like the parallels between magic and art and the production of art and stuff like
Mm.
that. And I'm wondering, like, because art, like magic, is a thing that like that you make that does something in the world, that also has like
Hmm.
a cost to it. And I wonder, like, when you write things with magic or like a magic system, like, do you think about like magic as an art or art as magic? Is that something that like you think is informing like your work or?
I love that question. I'll admit to you, I never made the connection at all, between magic and art, or between like art and how Nicholas is sort of forced to live his life. Um, so no, I think about it more as like a system of rules or an aesthetic expression of something that I'm interested in.
Mhm.
Um, my students and I am teaching a fantasy class right now, and my students and I were joking about magic that's just all vibes, no substance. And I think I kind of start with the vibes and then try to build substance around it. So I really wasn't thinking about art, but a lot of my good friends are visual artists, and I do think about art a lot in my normal life. But I got to think about that more in terms of magic. I love that question, but I don't have a good answer for you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's I also am really interested in like magic as a system of rules too, and the world building in this book. And like something I would love to talk about is like balancing world building and vibes, because like um yeah, they're both different ways of sort of like establishing the reality like of your book. I had a question that was gonna from that. Oh, right. Okay. So the ways that magic like expresses in the world, like is really cool. And like the way that it works with like books and sort of like using up books in some cases, and like, the care of the books being related to like preserving spells and stuff like that. Can you talk about like how the I guess like how the rules of magic as you've established them here, like how was that informed by like the story that you wanted to tell? Like if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I will be honest and tell you that the rules of magic were informed 100% by the story. Like I crafted the rules to match what I needed to happen at any given moment. And so there was some like, I think the term is retconning, I'd like write a bunch and then be like, oh, wait, I need to make this a magical rule. And then I would go back and rewrite everything to sort of match the rule. If you look at the first few drafts of like the first 10 chapters, the magic system looks nothing like it does now. I mean, there's writing, and I think that that's the only thread, like no books, no blood. It was like series of like cards at first. I don't even remember. It was just total chaos. I find rule-based magic for me, or at least in this book, it was super helpful to keep everything tight because my imagination was going everywhere, but you can't have a book that goes everywhere. You need a book that goes only certain places. And so thinking about how the magic could guide the story and reflect what I wanted to do at the same time, they were like totally intertwined. One was not happening without the other.
Mm, that's super interesting. I do like how magic can sort of function as like, in addition to having these rules, it's sort of like it does become a vehicle for sort of like exploring the inner landscapes of the characters who are utilizing it, because like
Mhm.
people are driven to use magic for different reasons or want to achieve different things with it. And, like that puts them at odds with other people. And it's just like a very interesting, I think, yeah, it's just like I really enjoyed just sort of like dwelling in this world. Yeah, like thank you for writing this. I think that's like a ridiculous thing to say, but thank you.
No, it's amazing to
Yeah.
hear. Thank you for reading it. It's totally shocking to me that people are reading it and like know my characters' names. Like, how'd you get in my head?
It is sort of like because I've written things too, like I had a webcomic a while back that people read, and it is sort of weird, like because you live with characters for a very long time, and like it is weird that they do become like a little bit more real, like when other people read and talk about them. Like
Mhm.
it's sort of like it's a very strange thing, It's like this was a product of my brain, and now other people are like thinking about it and talking about it. It's just like a kind of wild thing.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like gossiping about people that we know in common, but like I know them a little better or like not even better in like a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's just gossip about, Joanna.
Absolutely. Um, so cool. Thank you so much for coming. And are you working on anything right now that you can talk about? I know it's often, it's hard to talk about things in process sometimes, but yeah, what are you doing right now?
I am working on a new book and I'm very superstitious, so I'm not going to say too much about it. I have four keywords: loom, broom, moon, loon.
Ooh,
So that's what I've been sharing.
nice.
That's all I feel comfortable sharing. But it is like it's another sort of contemporary fantasy, real world type book. But hopefully it'll be a Minnesota book.
Ooh, very nice. Well, I hope, I'm gonna chew on those 4 words for a little while. And I hope that when the book comes to light, maybe you'll come back to the show and talk about that one too.
Yeah, you'll be like, I found the broom.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming again.
Thank
It was really a
you.
delight to have you and to read this book. So
This was lovely. Thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, listeners, please check out Blood Sister Scribe. It is absolutely gorgeous. And by the time that you are listening to this, it will be in the world. So you can pick it up at your favorite library or your favorite bookstore, wherever you get your books. Just please check it out. Thank you so much for listening. And it is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.